Greetings from Huntington, West Virginia here in Cabell County. We'll here we'll see places such as Huntington, Barbersville, and Milton. We'll also speak with James E. Casto, a book author and local historian, Debbie Campbell of the KYOWVA Genealogy Historical Society, Tyson Compton of the Cabell-Huntington Convention and Visitors Bureau, and Phil Carter, professor of social work at Marshall University, and they'll all give us a detailed account of some of Cabell County's history and culture.
What is now Cabell County was once populated by the ancient Adena culture, the mound builders, if you will. But despite all of the research that has been conducted, we know very little about the Adena, and we will perhaps forever be curious about how and why they disappeared. In the early 1700s, Native American tribes, the Shawnee, the Mingo, and the Seneca, used what's now Cabell County as hunting grounds and occasionally as battlegrounds. But they had few, if any, permanent settlements here. In 1749, the French sent a major expedition down the Ohio and buried metal plates at various intervals on the riverbank, claiming the valley for France. And they may well have visited Cabell County too. Despite the French claims, the British considered the Ohio Valley to be their real estate. With the settlement at Jamestown, they considered the western boundary of that settlement to be somewhere off at some undetermined distant point. So it was inevitable that the French and British claims in the New World would come in conflict, and the result of that conflict is what we refer to as the French and Indian War, although that was only a sideshow to the much larger 7 Years' War in Europe. The British prevailed in that battle, and they rewarded a number of American settlers who had fought on their side with grants of land. In 1772, Virginia Governor Dunmore, acting on behalf of George III, granted more than 28,000 acres along the Ohio River, from what's now Catlettsburg, Kentucky, stretching up the river to northern Cabell County, to John Savage and 59 others as a reward for their services. This is referred to as the Savage Grant, and was a pivotal point in Cabell County history. To the best of our knowledge, none of those original grant recipients ever settled here. Some of them may have visited, but we don't think any of them put down roots. But their land claims were passed down through their families, and in some instances sold. A Hampshire County resident, William Buffington by name, bought one of those plots that was part of the Savage Grant. And he willed that parcel of land to his sons, Thomas and Jonathan. And in the late 1790s, they came and settled at the mouth of the Wyandotte River, where it feeds into the Ohio. And one built on the east side of the Wyandotte and one built on the west side. And this was essentially the beginning of the village of Wyandotte. The Virginia General Assembly chartered the county of Cabell in 1809. It's named for Virginia Governor William Cabell. The name seemed logical enough since he had purchased much of the land that's now the county at a public auction. He liked to go to auctions, and he sometimes got carried away with the bidding, I believe. We think he may have visited the county, but we do know he never lived here. The name was suggested by one of the local settlers, John Coulter by name, who thought that it was only suitable to honor Cabell. The principal settlement, village if you will, in the new county of Cabell was Wyandotte, which had started as a trading post, was in an ideal spot because it was at the confluence of the Wyandotte River and the Ohio River. It became a stagecoach stop on the James River and Kanawha Turnpike. With the coming of steamboats, it became a steamboat landing. It was probably at one point the busiest commercial spot, or at least one of them, between Cincinnati and Pittsburgh. We talk about the Civil War and sometimes characterize it as a war that pitted brother against brother, fathers against sons. Probably nowhere was that more true in West Virginia. West Virginia was born of the conflict of the Civil War, but by no means was the populace of West Virginia unanimous in its endorsement of the Union. Confederate sympathies were very strong in West Virginia, and in some regions were actually the prevalent. Just a bit down the Ohio River from Huntington, across the county line from Cabell into Wayne County, is a little community called Cerrito. Cerrito has a very interesting history in that it was founded as an abolitionist settlement. Eli Thayer, a New Englander, established the city with shouldn't call it a city, it was by no means a city, let's call it a town. He established the town with the express purpose that showing that a community could be a thriving place without slavery. So, not surprisingly, with the outbreak of the Civil War, it became a Union garrison. Meanwhile, in Wyandotte, the public sentiments were divided, but probably the majority of the people who lived in Wyandotte had Confederate sympathies. In November of 1861, a Confederate cavalry force raided Wyandotte. It had been the scene of a Union training depot that was only lightly staffed, and the Confederate force was much larger, and they had no problem taking the town. Although apparently they never intended to stay, it was simply meant to be a raid, not an occupation. Well, word of what had happened spread downriver, and so the Union troops at Cerrito commandeered a steamboat. The SS Boston, loaded their troops aboard and proceeded up the river to Wyandotte. The Union claimed it as a great victory, but in fact the Confederates were pretty much on their way out of town before the Union troops ever landed from the steamboat. But the Union commander was incensed by what he saw as a unacceptable level of cooperation with the raiding Confederates on the part of the people in Wyandotte. So he burned the town. The town was all but leveled in a reprisal. That was probably, if not the largest Civil War battle in Cabell County, certainly the most colorful. Other than Huntington, the other significant community in Cabell County is Barbersville, which was chartered in 1813, named for James Barber, the governor of Virginia. It was solidly in Union hands during the Civil War, and so the county seat, which had been in Wyandotte, was moved to Barbersville during the Barbersville is perhaps best known over its life as having been the home of what would become Morris Harvey College and later the University of Charleston. It was founded as the Barbersville Seminary, but in 1901, Morris Harvey, a wealthy West Virginia coal man, and his wife gave the school $10,000, an unheard of sum in the day, and so they renamed the school Morris Harvey College. And even at that early date, there was feeling that the school would do better if it were in a larger community. So ultimately, it was moved to Charleston. Part of the college campus was used as a local school. Part was used for a state hospital. Later, when the state hospital was closed, it was converted into the West Virginia Veterans Home, a domicile for the state's needy veterans. There would be no city of Huntington were it not for a Yankee storekeeper named Collis P. Huntington. Huntington was born in 1821 in rural Connecticut, grew up on a family farm. He later said he thought the principal crop they raised on that farm was rocks. It was a fairly poverty-stricken early life. Huntington went to school to the advanced age of 18, left school, became a Yankee peddler, going from farm to farm, small town to small town, selling whatever he could, initially from 2 knapsacks that he carried on his back, later from a horse and wagon that he purchased. Ultimately, he went into partnership with one of his brothers and he opened a general store. But when gold was discovered in California in 1848, Huntington became one of the 49ers, one of the many people who in that year rushed to California. But Huntington didn't go to mine gold. He went to mine the miners. He opened a store selling tools, work clothing, tents, food, the things the miners need. He made a small fortune. That being the case, he looked around for somewhere to invest that money. Railroads were the coming thing, so he and a number of partners built a few miles of railroad. They made a little money. No, I'll be honest with you, they made a heck of a lot of money. In fact, they made so much money from that first few miles of railroad that they decided that from here on, they were in the railroad business. Ultimately, Huntington was able to persuade Congress to designate their railroad, the Central Pacific, to be the western link in the long-dreamed-of transcontinental railroad. Now, most of us will recall that story from our school days. You'll recall that there were two rival railroads, the Central Pacific and the Union Pacific. Each started building their own set of track. The Union Pacific started at the Missouri River heading west. The Central Pacific started in California heading east. It took 7 years, but ultimately the two sets of track linked up Promontory Point, Utah, and they drove a golden spike there that day to link them. Well, it was not long after that Huntington was called on by a delegation from the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway. It had long been the dream of people to link the James River and the Ohio River. At first the thought was that it could be done with a series of canals. When that didn't prove feasible, the James River and Kanawha Turnpike was built, a road of sorts. With the coming of railroads, it was an ideal spot to build one, and a start was made. But the Civil War came along, and marauding troops, Confederate and Union alike, tore up the rails, dynamited the locomotives, burned the rolling stock. As a consequence, the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway was pretty much bankrupt. They implored Huntington to provide the capital they needed to pay their bills, repair their track and rolling stock, and extend the tracks westward to the Ohio, because at that point there was nothing but a few miles of track in Virginia. Huntington obliged. He provided the capital and appointed himself president of the railroad. In keeping with some other gentlemen, he set out first by coach and then later by horseback to personally inspect the proposed right-of-way across the then new state of West Virginia. And ultimately that trip brought them to the little village of Guyandotte. Now there is a story told about what happened that day. It's said that Huntington and his party adjourned into a little inn to partake of some liquid refreshment, sarsaparilla, no doubt. And while they were inside, Huntington's horse somehow managed to break loose from the hitching post and climb up on the steps of the little inn. And the mayor of Guyandotte came along and didn't like what he saw and went into the inn and demanded to know whose horse that was out there. Well, Huntington told him it was his horse, and the mayor fined him $5. Huntington paid him on the spot, and the next day, the citizens of Guyandotte, who were sure that their little town was going to be the western terminus of the C&O Railway, were very disappointed to learn that was not going to be the case. Instead, Huntington and his party proceeded a few miles downriver, where they found an appealing tract of vacant river bottom land, and Huntington immediately set about purchasing it. That would become the new town of Huntington. People are sometimes surprised to learn that Collis P. Huntington never lived in Huntington. The truth of the matter is he had far-flung business interests, and there was no way that he could have remained in his new town, even if he had desired doing so. Instead, he placed his brother-in-law, Dallas Emmons, in charge. Emmons bought several thousand acres of land, and Huntington, meanwhile, commissioned a Boston civil engineer by the name of Rufus Cook to do a town plan. And Huntington gave Cook some very explicit instructions. He said he wanted a map of intersecting avenues and streets, each consecutively numbered so that any address would be easy to find, each block bisected by an alley for convenient access and egress. He said he wanted 2 of the avenues exceptionally wide enough to turn a team of oxen in them, is what he said. And so Huntington's 3rd Avenue and 5th Avenue are wider than the other avenues. The C&O reserved much of the land in the new town for its own purposes, to build a passenger depot, a freight station, a locomotive repair shop, which today remains one of the city's leading industries. The rest was sold off in business and residential lots, and the demand for those lots was brisk. The town grew from the get-go, so to speak. Barbersville lost the designation as county seat to Huntington. Guyandotte eventually gave up its charter as an independent village and agreed to be annexed by Huntington. Industries grew up in Huntington. The city was founded in 1871. In 1872, the Ensign Wheel and Car Works opened, and they literally made initially parts for railroad cars. Ultimately, they made the cars themselves and became one of the largest rail car building facilities in the world. It's only in recent years that the company has ceased production. Industry was always an important part, an important component of the Huntington economy. But what really built Huntington wasn't manufacturing. It was education on one hand, because what started as one room on the top of a hill as the Buffalo Academy is today's Marshall University, and we can think what that kind of the impact that has had on the economy over the city's history. But over and beyond that, from its very earliest years, the city of Huntington was a center of both retail and wholesale trade. When people for miles around talked about going to town, there wasn't any question what town they were going to. They were going to Huntington. They were going to Huntington to shop, to see the doctor, to go to the Keith Albee and take in a movie, to eat in some of the city's many restaurants. Meanwhile, the coal that was dug from the mines in southern West Virginia, if it was intended to be exported abroad, it was put on the C&O trains and taken east to the port at Newport News. But if it was to be used by people in this country, by factories, power plants in this country, it went to market via Huntington. The C&O hauled it to Huntington, where it was then loaded onto river barges and either taken up to Pittsburgh or down to Cincinnati. And so we thrived on that. Meanwhile, all of the manufactured goods that were needed in the coal fields went to the coal fields from Huntington. 3rd Avenue was lined with warehouses and offices of wholesale firms that thrived because they sold things, whether it's picks and shovels or work boots, to the mining companies and to the miners themselves. We talk about the old-fashioned company store. You load 16 tons, and what do you get? You know, we were sold to the company store. Well, if you went into a mining company's store in the coal fields in southern West Virginia, in the 1920s or the 30s or the 40s, almost everything in that store arrived there from Huntington. That's what built Huntington.
We have a large glass industry. It started out, I'm sure, by little glass makers, but we have Owens, Illinois, which manufactured bottles, and they started as the Bolt glass manufacturing company in 1913. And a lot of the men in this area in the community worked there. At one time they employed, I think it was over 1,000 people. And they closed down in 1993. And I was able to do a historic preservation of some of their materials. While I was studying this thing about Owens, Illinois, I was very impressed because this was during the before the World War I, before World War II, and they pretty well, before the welfare system and everything, and they pretty well took care of their own from cradle to grave. They had health care, they had sports, recreation. You were on usually 3 or 4 different shifts. Everybody kind of worked together, got to know each other. Lots of stuff that you think of in terms of maybe somebody like Toyota nowadays providing gym and recreation. They were way ahead of their time. And so it went from that. They also had a plant here called Huntington Tumbler, and they made, of course, tumblers. And there was the China Company over on 16th Street, which made china. And some of the streets over in the Calvert Boulevard area are named after different pottery, like Dalton was a China. Blinko Glass is another glass company that was family owned since 1893. Mr. William Blinko came from England, and he, in the business itself, has been in Milton since 1921, and it's family owned. And they make different sorts of glass. He started out, he wanted to make glass for stained glass windows, and I'm sure they have plenty of stained glass windows. I don't know how much they do of that still, but they found a market for decorative glass here. So they hand blow the glass. You can still go to the factory tours and watch the glass being blown. Every year, about West Virginia's birthday on June 20th, they make a commemorative piece that is limited to the number. For example, if West Virginia was 149 years old, there would just be 149 vases. So in the last few years, that's gotten really popular, and people come. One of the largest cemeteries as far as attractions, if you can, to a genealogist or a historian, that is an attraction, but that would be our cemetery in Huntington. It's atop of 20th Street Hill. It's called Spring Hill. It's been around for a long, long time. It originally probably had a small family burial plot on it somewhere, and it has special sections set aside for soldiers. It has Confederate soldiers, and it has Union soldiers. They are kind of near one another. It has a Catholic section, and a lot of the nuns from there are buried there. It has a Jewish section. It has an African American section. There's a lot of mausoleums, large mausoleums of the families in Huntington. I mean, some of the people killed in the plane crash at Marshall, there's a monument there to them. It has just a park-like setting, because some cemeteries are not in parks, and some are, their burial grounds are just different.
My earliest memories of leaders and great contributors in the Huntington tri-state area would be that of reading about, hearing about Dr. Carter G. Woodson. As a person who attended school at Kelly Miller, another great black educator and leader, and then graduating from the previously predominant white school, Washington Irving in Clarksburg, West Virginia, I had an appreciation for the different emphasis that was placed on black leadership. And in Huntington, Carter G. Woodson was a name that everyone revered. Everyone knew something about Carter G. Woodson. And the difference in Huntington was that there were many relatives, blood relatives of Carter G. Woodson. One of those individuals that talked a great deal about Carter G. Woodson was James Gibson, an attorney who was the student activist attorney for the group known as the Civic Interest Progressives that were engaged in a great deal of desegregation efforts. After reading Dr. Carter G. Woodson's book, The Miseducation of the Negro, I had even a greater appreciation and understanding for why many people saw him as such an enlightened and forward-thinking leader. Also, the contrast between the lack of emphasis on African American history, black history, or leadership development and empowerment within the white educational institution versus the black institution was something that really I began to see very, very clearly, and set me on a path to making that kind of distinction and trying to correct some of that for the rest of my life. And every student I've come into contact with doesn't make any difference, the color, the background, the income, the geography, or the language. I refer them to The Misunderstanding of the Negro, a classic book by Carter G. Woodson. He wrote many books, but most important of all, he developed a publishing company, and his legacy carries on today and will probably be with the African American community forever. And that is his establishment of African American Month, and now the institutions that have followed, from publishing to setting up those institutions that guard quality African American education. So Carter G. Woodson would be top on the list of not only academic leaders, but he also talked about the economics. He talked about every aspect of life and interpreted it and prescribed for a future for African American. Hal Greer, Hurrying Hal, one of the greatest basketball players in the history of the world, definitely in West Virginia history, Marshall's history, and especially Douglas High School, the high school he graduated from in Huntington, West Virginia. I first came into contact with Hal Greer in a sports magazine, and I knew, even though I was from Clarksburg, West Virginia, reared in Barber County and born in Clay County in a town called Wyden, I had really never heard of Marshall University, even though in the language of West Virginians, it was just down the road a piece from Clarksburg. Our images of universities were dominated by West Virginia State, Bluefield State, and West Virginia University. And when I read about this college called Marshall University and Hal Greer, and that it had desegregated with Hal Greer, which would have been about 3 years prior to that, I said, maybe I can go there. Maybe I can get a scholarship. Maybe I can play basketball. And so I gave it a try. Marshall never sent me an invitation. They never sent me a scholarship. So I said, well, I'll do a walk-on. And I walked on. Shortly thereafter, I began to notice that there was this guy who would come home often and assemble these players and play with us on the basketball court, on the hard court in the black community, the outdoors courts, and also at Marshall. And it was Hal Greer. At that time, I didn't realize the significance of that. You're playing with one of the great athletes in the history of Marshall, but also someone that was soon to be selected as one of the 50 greatest professional athletes in the world, Hal Greer. Hal, to me, did what he was supposed to do. He came from the black community. He came from an all-black school. He was the first African-American athlete to probably desegregate that system in the majority white institutions in West Virginia. And he did it at the highest level. He was the best at basketball. So no one could deny who Hal Greer was or say anything about him. Because he was the best. He played basketball, and he was not involved, as far as I know, in other kinds of demonstrations. That should have been a significant enough contribution in itself to be the first African American to participate in the athletics without doing some demonstrations to top that off. Memphis, Tennessee Garrison. Another legendary icon of the civil rights movement, a leader unduplicated, a person of integrity, an innovator, a first, a teacher, a social worker, a counselor, and someone who had the opportunity and the insight through education, experience, and risk-taking to be able to advise at a high level. Memphis, Tennessee Garrison obviously would attract attention by virtue of the name, Memphis, Tennessee Garrison. She did great things as really a social worker before we had licensed social worker and teacher in McDowell County and southern West Virginia. So much so that she was recognized by the NAACP and helped form the NAACP in West Virginia, came to Huntington, helped strengthen the NAACP in Huntington, and also became a first vice president of the national NAACP. She was an innovator and someone who knew how to negotiate at a level that many of the other black leaders did not. And I believe it came from her coalfield experience, but also from the vantage point of being in McDowell County, which had strong political connections to the state and to the nation with its powerful Republican influence and relationship with the coal barons and the politicians who had to deal with the African American community. Not only that, there were black elected officials that were statewide and had national prominence that came out of McDowell County as one of the major coal producing counties in the United States and in the world. Memphis T. Garrison was an advisor to the student organization, even though at that time we were looking for a more radical perspective. We respected her counsel. We listened to her advice. And by the time we were reaching political consciousness and maturity and beginning to engage in direct action, there was another group of leaders that were emerging, and we probably listened more to their voices and their tactics than to Memphis T. Garrison. However, it did not diminish her status and our knowledge of that and our respect for her. And to this day, she ranks as one of the legends in my memory. Another influential leader was Marion T. Bunchy Gray. Mrs. Gray would be considered as the mother of the 60s student initiatives and the combination of young people in the Huntington community and Marshall University students. Mrs. Gray would convene students at her house, and she would have the most delicious beans with steak as the meat in the beans. We'll never forget that because we were always hungry. And that was the way she assembled us. You students need to come over here and get together. So we'd get together, go to Mrs. Gray's house, and sometimes before the meal or after the meal, she would then curse us out. And she did it in such a way that it heightened your consciousness. You were, sometimes you were angry, most of the times you wanted to laugh and in a way say, but she's right. She helped navigate the racist system that existed in Huntington. She personally intervened because she knew everyone and everyone knew her. She'd call people on the phone if we would tell. It was like sometimes we would tattle on what the bad racists were doing. And she would pick up the phone and call them and lay them out while we were sitting there. She was also a Mother Jones, like Mother Jones was to the United Mine Workers and the coal miners. Mrs. Gray was to the students in the community and on Marshall's campus, and at West Virginia State and Bluefield State and everywhere else there was action going on. She encouraged, she cajoled, she challenged, she alienated, and then she'd bring you together through food. She would go downtown to city council, and I know the city councilman probably did not want Mrs. Gray coming down there and laying them out. And she was one of the few people that I know of that was that brave, that courageous. So it wasn't something like many leaders of today would tell you, well, y'all go do this. She did it, and then we followed. So her entire family was involved. Her husband was one of the first business people and managers of a major white institution, which was a restaurant, Jim Spaghetti House, here in Huntington. And he was in that role for many years as a legend unto himself and a high-quality restaurant. We'll all thank forever and appreciate the role Mrs. Gray played in nurturing and nudging the leadership development of the students in the civil rights movement in Huntington and throughout the state and the nation. A leader who played a dual role of inviting the athletes and student scholars who were African American to join two institutions and to take up roles that we hadn't taken up before was Marshall Grayson. They called him tiny, and he probably weighed about 500 pounds. A big man, someone who knew our inner selves better than probably anyone else. He encouraged us and supported us to do our own thing, not necessarily under the umbrella of the NAACP, even though at that time he was the president of the NAACP. I believe it was approximately 1961. And he also was responsible for the founding of the first African-American Greek fraternity or any kind of Greek organization on Marshall's campus, December 2nd, 1962, and that was Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity. He was the man behind all of that. And he did it very, very low-key. He did it without a great deal of celebrity about it. I remember one incident in particular. It was the first open public demonstration in Huntington that I know that any students were involved in, and I arrived here in '59. And it was a demonstration against the racist practices of the Huntington Theater Corporation. And that was, in one theater, black folks could not attend the movie, whether you sit in the balcony or you sit on the main floor, unless it was some kind of special arrangement for your group. At another theater, you could only sit in the balcony. And in another theater, the KYOWVA, that was where the artist series from Marshall University took place, so students were paying their money. Therefore, they had to make accommodations, and on artist series nights, you could attend the KYOWVA theater. But movie time during the rest of the week, you couldn't. You could, however, if you were from the continent of Africa. And later on we found out you could if you had a New York City Bronx accent. Because there was a guy named Bruce Moody who radiated "don't mess with me" attitude and persona. And Bruce could go to the KYOWVA. He could take his girlfriend, and sometimes he would take a few of the rest of us, and they would never bother Bruce, which signaled very clearly that there wasn't any policy that really existed that made any sense. Not that racism ever made any sense, and and Bruce Moody detected this. And as a result, we began to identify students that could endure and withstand the pressure of demonstrating in public. And that process took a while. I was not one of those who said, let's go out there and do it, because I was still on scholarship. I had 61 to play and 62, 63 for my final year. And I understood what would happen. But Bruce challenged me as one of my basketball mentors, and also Willie Tucker and we were both recruited at the same time with Marshall. So we went out on the picket line. That picket line was supported and protected and advised by Mr. Grayson. As I stated, Mr. Grayson was a big man in character, in principle, and in size. And he wore a gigantic cowboy hat. So he was out there making sure that everything was okay, that it didn't interfere or anything like that. And we demonstrated, and there was probably 7 to 9 people, most from out of town. There might have been, I believe, one person that was from Huntington or the Tri-State that was involved in that first public demonstration against what was then known as the Palace Theater. Mr. Grayson won the day, and within probably a week or so, the movie theaters were desegregated. That was what happened with that. The next year, he worked very diligently with us and very carefully. He fed us, and this seems to be a reoccurring theme of connectivity. And he would just lavish us with these meals until we eventually pulled together a group that emerged as the new Epsilon Delta undergraduate chapter of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, and which materialized on December 2nd, 1962. My experience and coming into being and realizing the resilience and resistance part of my humanity has its origins around the dinner table and listening to the tales of my stepfather, who was UMW member and coal miner, and my mother's experience, and talking about my relatives on my father's side who seem to have all been trapped in a mine or victims of broken bones, or in the case of my father and some of his relatives, death by mining, death by your job, which was an incentive for me, because I said, I ain't never going into a bind ever. I am going to college. And that was instilled in us from childhood. There was never a second thought. You go to high school, you graduate, you go to college. Nobody ever thought about where you get the money or how much it costs. That's what you were going to do some way, somehow. Went through high school in Clarksburg, attended a one-room school, 8 classes, 1 teacher who played multiple roles, the gym teacher, the supervisor of your meals, the janitor, who taught all different subjects and 8 different classes in one classroom without an assistant. That was my 1st through 8th grade experience. Then we moved to Clarksburg, West Virginia, and I enrolled in Kelly Miller, another all-black institution, And then when I was a sophomore, a desegregation effort came in Harrison County and Clarksburg, and we were enrolled in the formerly predominantly white Washington Irving High School. So with those kinds of experiences of dealing with all these different transitions, which were traumatic, from really rural West Virginia into the city of Clarksburg, and then from a predominantly black school into an overwhelmingly white school. These were experiences that you never forget. And some of them you will just never adjust to. I always say the loneliest day of my life was the first day I was in Washington Irving High School. I later met friends, and that had a lot to do with me being an athlete. I don't know what the experience was of the black women who weren't athletes and how they navigated that system. Went to Marshall University, and in order to go to Marshall, I had to get a job after high school. I saw my white friends with really nice jobs, and we would see them working, and I couldn't get a job. Because everyone knew I was going to go to college, the principal, Mr. E.B. Saunders, of the Kelly Miller School, which had been desegregated, which meant it had also been abandoned, worked with some other people to get me a job. And they collectively put together a job. So I got steady work, guaranteed steady work, and that I would be able to work every day until I got ready to go to school on the garbage truck. On the garbage truck, I was fortunate enough to have an uncle who was the driver, and I'll never forget the way all the guys on the garbage truck looked after me. It's dangerous work, and again, they were supportive. They made sure I set the garbage cans back. I didn't lift them with the garbage in them. I didn't ride in the dangerous place on the truck. They protected me, and I realized that. I also realized one day, I told my mother, I really don't want to be seen on the garbage truck anymore. I see my friends out in the morning, and I'm almost hiding from them. They have good jobs as students, and I'm on the garbage truck. I'll never forget her response. Who do you think you are? There are good men and great men that work on the garbage truck. As a matter of fact, you got a job on the garbage truck with your uncle, who is the driver. Who do you think you are that you should not work when these men have full jobs there? I never forgot that. That was probably one of the most sobering experiences in my life, to recognize the mistake that I had made in perceiving myself as being different from the people who were protecting me and working with me and supporting me, and then all of those who were involved in getting me this job. Came to Marshall, met some great guys, black, white, and a lot of the Jewish guys that I'd never had contact with Jewish guys from New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh. And there was like a different attitude and more of a solidarity with some of these guys in the perceptions of what was going on, and also some of the white guys from the rural area. There was something that just was unsettling about Huntington. I really never accepted what was going on here, and thought about leaving. The coach made sure I eventually had a job, so I didn't leave. Went back home, and a guy named Roy Davis, who attended a school with me at Kelly Miller and in Washington Irving, we began looking for a summer job. We could not find a summer job. We're not just high school graduates. We now are college guys. Can't we get a job in our own hometown when you are employing the other white kids? The answer was a resounding no, and we couldn't even go back and work on the garbage truck again. So we began going, asking people for jobs, and being rejected. As a result, we decided, well, we got $5. Will you serve us? And they refused to serve us. So it ended up at the Robinson Grand Theater restaurant, and we asked for a hamburger and a Coke. They overcharged us so horrendously, and I guess it was 60 or 61, that we refused to, maybe we did pay and we refused to leave. We were going to eat. If it cost that much, we were going to sit there and eat it at the counter. You could not eat at the counter in Clarksburg at the Robinson Grand Theater restaurant. They called the police on us, and we were promptly arrested for trying to eat our hamburger and drink our overpriced meal. Again, the black community responded immediately, and that was unanticipated. We didn't know what was going to happen. we didn't know we were going to be arrested. And the community responded very, very quickly. No one pointed a finger and said, you guys shouldn't have done that or anything like that. I think they understood that maybe they could have done a little bit more. Then later on, got involved with Bruce Moody and other people, and Willie Tucker, and other leaders, and Gus Cleckley. And Gus Cleckley became the leader as a student of the city NAACP, and I became one of the leaders, along with Pat Austin and others, of the Civic Interest Progressives. Those two groups came together, and there were so many demonstrations that took place in Huntington that we probably can't even count all of them that took place. As a result of that, reports were written on Huntington. Huntington then formed a Human Relations Commission. Governor W.W. Barron began issuing executive orders to deal with issues here. And Marshall University tried to deal with some of the really terrible practices on its campus, like the Old South days, where a white line was drawn right down the middle of Marshall's campus. One side was called the South, the other side was called the North, and a fraternity named Kappa Alpha Order of rode horses in Confederate uniforms around the campus with swords and guns, and would then ride up to the Old Main, which is the Central Administration Building. The president would then come out and surrender the campus to the Confederacy, and they would lower the American flag and raise the Confederate flag. Then they would gallop off and go downtown and do the same thing at City Hall. Now, this is unbelievable that it was taking place. So we had some, shall we say, discussions with those groups and some demonstrations, and they changed. Later on, we got involved with many other activities in Huntington, and when I finally graduated, I found out everybody hated me. And one way to deal with that, because the whites control the economy, was not to give you a job. And eventually, due to starvation and having developed a fondness for food and shelter, I had to leave. I experienced how one could be influential in politics, but I wasn't the only one who had to leave. There were many others that were involved that had to leave, and we think if we would have remained here, we could have been able to practice politics, that there would have been a significant difference. And I got involved with the federal government and was able to develop some innovative programs with Job Corps. And later went to the University of Oklahoma, met a lot of really great people from California and the Midwest, and got another different kind of flavor with different groups. And out of that, met some people from San Francisco who recommended me to some people in Harlem, and eventually I ended up being hired as executive director of Congress of Racial Equality, one of the big 4 or 5 civil rights groups, on their biggest project, which was called Cleveland Target City, funded by Ford Foundation. And out of that project, the first black mayor of a major city was elected, Colonel Stokes. I eventually left there and was given a scholarship, fellowship at University of Pittsburgh by a guy named James Cunningham, who was the Ford Foundation manager for that project. He was also a faculty member at the University of Pitt. Went in that program, and eventually I ended up getting teaching in that program, and entering the PhD program at the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs. Ended up getting a job in that program and was there for about 10 years. But in that process, developed these political institutions. Attended many of the, I guess you would call them founding modern-day political movement institutions that birth these governors and African-American politicians that you see today. With that kind of experience and that kind of support, I felt I could probably do anything and go anywhere in the world and be successful, make a contribution, and not compromise the principles and the practices too much that I have learned from so many great people.
Cabell County and Huntington area really have a lot to offer as far as attractions. In fact, one of the taglines that we use right now is "Where Heritage Comes Alive," because this area is so rich in its heritage. Of course, Huntington was built on river and rail. That's how it came into being, and in fact named for the railroad magnate that started it all, Collis P. Huntington. And the thing that makes Huntington so interesting is this beautiful architecture that we still have, that's not only undisturbed, but that over the past few years has been renovated and revived and restored. So we have these beautiful old buildings, that are coming to life again. As far as attractions specifically, I think what sets us apart is having Camden Park, which of course is the only amusement park in West Virginia, and one of the oldest in the country, and still has one of the wooden roller coasters. So we have people who come from across the country just to ride on that wooden roller coaster. In fact, the CVB filmed our holiday message there last year on the roller coaster, and it was awesome. It got a lot of attention. In addition to that, we have Heritage Farm, Museum and Village, which is truly a gem for us. Recently, it was the site for filming of a documentary about the Hatfields and McCoys, which will support a miniseries filmed by the History Channel starring Kevin Costner. So it's great to know that we'll be featured, across the country in this TV series. And another thing about Heritage Farm that makes it so interesting is it's great for generational visits. We see a lot of grandparents taking their grandchildren there because of the exhibits. They can say, well, this is what I grew up with, or this is what my parents used. And of course, in today's technological world, it's interesting, I think, for the kids to see what came before iPods and iPhones and all those great devices we have today. And Blenko Glass, another one of our great featured attractions, one of the few remaining glass blowing factories, in the United States. So all of these are great for both individual visitors, group tours. Everybody that comes to Huntington wants to see, these things. And of course, the Huntington Museum of Art, which is a world-class art museum with top certification, beautiful, incredible exhibits there. So you've got both the old and the new, which sort of merge together. Some of our other attractions, I think, as far as shopping, we've got Pullman Square downtown. That's one of the top-rated destinations for our visitors. One thing everybody loves to do when they're traveling, whether it's for a day or a week or whatever time period, they love to eat and they love to shop. And certainly downtown Huntington and even other parts of Cabell County offer that. We've got the Huntington Mall in Cabell County, which is the largest mall in West Virginia as well. Some very unique restaurants, Hillbilly Hot Dogs, which has been featured on dining dives and drive-ins, several times. Central City Cafe, also featured on that same show. And we're in the process of starting an organization. It's called Delicious Huntington, which will feature, because we do have a nice and wide variety of locally owned restaurants, that aren't chains, that have a lot to offer the visitor, in a unique experience. For example, Savannah's Restaurant, which is, some of the best quality food that you'll ever find, and a very extensive wine list that wins awards over and over. 21 at the Frederick, which is a great restaurant in this beautiful old hotel, and one of our newest restaurants, Huntington Prime, which one of their main goals is to use locally and regionally grown produce in their menu. Makes it great. And they've just opened a penthouse section in their restaurant, so that you've got the restaurant on the ground floor, but on weekends you can take advantage of the great views that their penthouse offers. So a lot of options as far as dining and shopping. Of course, we have the KYOWVA Theater, beautiful old restored theater. This grand, certainly you don't find those today. And the modern cinemas may offer comfort, with the plush seats and your cup holders and the reclining seats and all of that. But when you talk about an experience in going to the theater, and of course, for me, it was a theater I grew up going to see movies. And it's just, we used to joke as kids, it was an experience just to go to the restroom, because you go down this long, curving stairway into the basement. It's, just so grand and beautiful, and of course, a great treasure for Huntington. Now, of course, it's home to the Martial Artist Series, so the community can see a wide variety of performing arts and entertainment there. We have the Big Sandy Superstore Arena, talking about entertainment, which brings more and more, bringing big name entertainment to the community. George Jones, Barry Manilow, a wide variety of entertainment. Again, a great attractor to our Heritage Station, which is home to our visitor center and the Convention and Visitors, which is a depot that had been built in the late 1800s. And in the late 70s, it had been renovated and restored. For many years, there had been a restaurant in the space that we now occupy, and in fact, it was called Heritage Station Restaurant, and a few shops in the buildings just behind us. So when the CVB was looking for a new home, and this space was available, we thought, what better place to be than this old depot that used to serve to connect people, to points outlying, but also as they came into the city. So now, once again, as people come into the city, they would come here and be connected with all there was to see and do. So once we moved in, and our landlord is the Greater Huntington Park and Recreation District, and they have an office on site as well. So we partnered together and said, we found that our success here at the Visitor Center was doing so well, we thought, why not revive the rest of Heritage Station as well. So we're now in this old depot, this large space, and we thought, of course we want the visitor to be able to come in and get their brochure, which they can still do, but we have a visitor liaison who greets them. We extended our hours to include the weekend and into the evening because that's when people are traveling. But we created a guest station so they would have a computer they can stop and, if they want to check their email or, any of that thing necessary for a computer. We created what's called a listening station where interesting people from Huntington tell stories of its past so that the visitor gets an even more in-depth experience with some of the things they might be seeing and doing. We started a video system so that we could put, today's world, it's all about image sometimes. We don't read as much as we used to, especially the younger generation. So we have these videos of our attractions that people can view as well. Then in addition to that, we rented part of our space to a bakery, the River and Rail Bakery, so that the visitor could, of course, who doesn't love the smell, this great aroma of baked goods, cookies, and breads, that go through. And in addition to that, we wanted to have a gift shop, which we, keeping in theme with, because we're in a depot and our train history, so we called it the Red Caboose. And it's more than just a gift shop because we do offer all of the general souvenirs that people like to collect as they go around the country. But it also, we like to say that people who visit can take home a piece of West Virginia with them because we sell, it's an artisan center as well. And we sell products from local artists, whether it's note cards, postcards, clothing, pottery, glassware, jewelry, all these things that are created by our local artists. So again, not only are we offering the visitor something unique to choose from in their purchases, but we're helping to provide a source of income for local artists. So, and so much of what we do here is about partnerships, and I think that's what really has helped us to move forward, because we've realized that the more we work together, with whatever group or individual that is, the more we can achieve. So, talking of working together, then we partnered with the park board, and we wanted to, a lot of people might be familiar with Capitol Market in Charleston. We sort of modeled it after Capitol Market, but we wanted these complimentary shops that would be unique and, again, inviting to the visitor. Of course, the local community supports us as well, and we certainly provide a resource for them. And it's nice that it's a place where both visitors and locals can really started to grow. There's this great energy here. In fact, recently our board of directors was meeting in our space downstairs. We have this large bay window. And when we first started meeting here, we would sit there for the entire meeting and not see a person outside. And now you're sitting there and people are coming and going in every direction. And there's smiling and laughter and kids playing. And it's just, it really is incredible spirit and energy that it's taken on. And again, keeping with our history of River and Rail, we had, this was back in the 70s when they renovated, they brought a Pullman car and a train engine, number 10 train engine, and placed it in front of Heritage Station. And that was very cool because obviously it drew a lot of attention. People love to be able to come down and they have their picture made with the train. Kids can crawl up on it and everything. But it was right in front of our buildings. So when we moved in, the CVB moved in, we thought, wouldn't it be nice if we were able just to move this, shift it down a little bit, which we did. So now it's, at the corner of our property, still grabs attention, but now the property is opened up. People can see us. We've put up some great signage that we think, with the life and vibrancy that's happening in Pullman Square and downtown Huntington, it's drawing people over to our area. So I think we're so blessed to have Marshall University in the community. For one thing, it's just a tremendous resource. And when I have a question about, a particular subject, in fact, we have a professor in his class who will be doing some GIS mapping for us. So it's like having this field of experts right here in our own backyard. Tremendous resource. And Marshall University is really growing in terms of, both physically, they're growing their sports complex and buildings, but they're growing as a university and continuing to draw more and more student enrollment. And I think that's very integral to the growth, as they have been in the past. They continue to be integral to the growth of Huntington and Cabell County as a community. The one thing that we're trying to really work on is retaining those students, because, you know, as you find in a lot of states, sometimes the students may feel like there aren't the jobs there for them. So we have groups and organizations who are working to make a difference there. In fact, our sales director is a recent Marshall graduate, and we specifically like the fact that we were able to secure this young talent with, you know, great innovative ideas and keep someone like that in.